All right, so good afternoon. Thank you so much for joining me. I'm Erin Owens. I'm a professor in the Newton Gresham Library, and as scholarly communications librarian, I assist students and faculty with a number of different topics that relate to conducting original research and then publishing or otherwise disseminating the findings from that research. Today's session is going to be focused on systematic reviews and in particular a tool called Rayyan, which can support us in doing systematic reviews. I will let you know in advance, I will share a copy of the slides after the session. I'll also be posting a recording. Usually takes me a couple of days just to get the recording cleaned up and captioned and posted, but all of that will be available for you afterwards. All right. So my focus today is primarily going to be on the Rayyan tool itself, but I do always like to just start with a little bit of an introduction to systematic reviews as a research method so that we're all sort of on the same page. A systematic review attempts to collate all the empirical evidence that fits pre-specified criteria in order to answer a specific research question. So I've kind of highlighted here the three really critical pieces of that definition. All the evidence. When we say all, I mean, it's probably inevitable that we miss something that's relevant, right? Because we're humans and there's information from so many time periods in so many formats. But at least the aspiration is that we are as comprehensive as we could reasonably be in gathering evidence um, for a specific research question. This is another piece that's really important. In a lot of types of research, we may go in with a very, very specific question and hypothesis, or we may go in with a very general question, kind of doing exploratory research to see what we might learn. But with systematic reviews in particular, it's going to be a very, very specific research question. The other thing that will be specified in addition to the question is the criteria that a study or a piece of research would have to meet in order to fit in our comprehensive collection of evidence, right? So we might define criteria based on a certain method. So it's like, I'm looking for all evidence that speaks to this question if they used a randomized controlled trial method, um, or we might have criteria about when things were published. We might have criteria about looking at peer-reviewed articles and not including conference presentations or dissertations. So there's a number of different ways the criteria may come into play depending on our project, but systematic reviews are characterized by having very, very specific criteria to determine when a study is going to be included and when a study is not included. Systematic reviews are very, very structured using these very transparent and reproducible methods. So it's almost like if we're doing a literature review, the same way that we would imagine standing at a lab table and doing a chemistry experiment. We have to be able to document every single move that we've made, every two things that we've combined in the same way so that another person could reproduce the search process that we've done. They can go to the same databases, put in the same search terms, apply the same criteria, and they should be able to come up with essentially the same literature that we came up with. We want it to be a step-by-step reproducible protocol. The goal for that is to minimize bias. That way, people who are looking at our review of the literature don't have questions about why is this included? Well, why didn't you include that guy's study over there? Because all of those questions should be clearly addressed by our methods and our criteria. The goal of all of that is that the findings from that systematic review will be more reliable than if we just did a general literature review where we kind of did some searches, captured whatever was convenient, and synthesized it. Hopefully, this will be more comprehensive, more reliable, and therefore the conclusions that we draw and the decisions that we make on the basis of that information will also be more reliable. So I've kind of said some of this already. Specifying our question, really clarifying the scope and defining our explicit criteria. Then making every reasonable effort to find all the relevant research that fit the criteria and to ensure that issues of bias are accounted for. And then after we've done as complete of a search as we can, then we analyze all of those included studies to draw conclusions in an impartial and objective way. So now systematic reviews, if we kind of take a step back, systematic reviews are one type of a larger category of things called evidence synthesis. There's a lot of different evidence synthesis methods that are available. If we think of just doing a very traditional literature review, sort of a convenience literature review, technically we are gathering and synthesizing evidence, right? A systematic review is a very specific type of synthesis that follows all of these very structured rules. There's other types of reviews like an umbrella review in which the papers that you're going to gather together and synthesize are all themselves reviews. So it's like a review of reviews. So there are different methods here to take into account and to recognize that not every question is well suited to being a systematic review specifically. Some questions are going to fit better as a different type, including like a narrative literature review, which is less structured. So it's good to kind of understand we can search for literature and do a review that is not inherently a systematic review. We can search for things in a systematic way using systematic searching and yet not necessarily meet all of the criteria to actually call our work a systematic review. So just kind of some clarity there on how that fits in. Quick overview of the process. I'm only going to go in depth on certain steps today, but I also want to kind of have an overview here. And I've linked to some additional sources for you. So if you want to dive a little deeper into any of these particular aspects of the systematic review process, you'll have these resources. So we define our research question. There are a number of different models out there for how a question is structured. In healthcare, the PICO or PICO framework is very common. You phrase your question in terms of a population, a health intervention, what you're going to compare that intervention to, and then an outcome. So asking, does this drug achieve this outcome in this group of people better than exercise, better than diet, better than doing nothing? So you're kind of comparing the intervention and the comparison in that specific group with the mind for a specific outcome. So PICO is very well known and popular in health, but it's not the only question framework. There's some other frameworks here, PEO, Spider, SPICE. I'm not going to go into all of these in detail, but each one accommodates different elements of a question that may go together. In general, any question we're going to come up with for a systematic review should be FINER. I love this acronym. It means your question should be feasible, interesting, novel, ethical, and relevant. I think the ethical piece of that is, of course, always very important. Based on the research question, we define our specific inclusion and exclusion criteria. So as I indicated earlier, that might be, I'm only going to look at studies that used certain methods or that covered certain populations, only studies that measured a specific variable, years of publication. There could be a number of different things there, depending on what is going to be most relevant for your question to kind of get you to a scope that is reasonable, where you're not trying to get literally the entire body of knowledge in a subject field. We identify the appropriate databases where we're going to search for literature. PubMed is sort of one of the standard databases in health research, but other databases are going to be more appropriate in other fields. The key is you always want to search in more than one database for something to really be a systematic review. There's no prescribed number of databases because you want to identify all of those that are appropriate. So all of those that are going to be considered standards in the discipline that are going to have a significant amount of relevant content, but we also realize that we're limited by things like what does our institution have access to. So it may not be possible to search every single database that one would desire. In general, the best we can say is we want to search more than one. Our next step is going to be to formulate our actual search strategy. So this means we're going to take our question, we're going to break it down into key concepts, and then based on those concepts, we're going to come up with the actual words and phrases that we're going to put into a search. We have to kind of identify a perfect version of that search. But then for every single database, they're going to support different kinds of searching. Um, and we're going to have to kind of translate our search, if you will, to fit the fields in that database, the operators that database supports, and so forth. This is often the stage where a systematic review team will consult with or include a librarian in the project to help determine the most appropriate databases and craft those search strategies, particularly to go through that translation process and really structure the searches to maximize every separate database. All right, now this is the big piece of what we're going to focus on today. After you have identified your databases and written your searches, you go do the searches, and then you download the results out of each database. And if you're going to use Rayyan, as we're going to look at today, you'll want one of these file formats that's compatible with Rayyan. You'll download your database results to that format, and then we'll be able to upload that file into Rayyan to continue with these further steps. Deduplicating references is a big step. When we search 3, 4, 5, 6 databases, it is inevitable that we will have articles that appeared in multiple databases. So deduplication is really critical. Rayyan can help with that. They do have some good tools for deduplication, but it can also be done in other ways. If you already use a reference manager like Zotero, you may be more comfortable doing your deduplication in that tool. If you don't already have a preferred space where you're comfortable doing that, then I encourage you to explore Rayyan for that. After we deduplicate, we're going to go through all of our results and read the title and the abstract only. We will apply those really specific inclusion criteria that we defined, and we'll decide which studies seem relevant according to those criteria. We'll come back together as a team because in general, there will be a team of people in a true systematic review. But of course, you could just be doing a sort of systematized search on your own and still using Rayyan as a tool. So in general, you'll have a team that'll come back together. You'll discuss your screening results, kind of come to a consensus about include, exclude, or maybe. You can still have some maybe articles at this stage that you're not sure about. Then anything that you marked as yes include or maybe include, all of that's going to get pushed forward to the next round. You're going to go through all of those remaining results and read the whole paper, applying your criteria again, and then making final decisions on what to exclude. So at this stage, some of those maybes, you might be able to sort it out more clearly when you've read the whole paper. Note that when we're talking about a systematic review and this goal of being as comprehensive as possible, the number of results that we're screening in these stages could be thousands, it could be tens of thousands. There is quite a lot of work involved, even just getting through reading the abstracts, much less getting through the full text stage, which again is a good reason why this is often done in teams, where you can find some way to break things apart and say, okay, well, everything needs to be read by at least 2 people, but maybe not all 5 researchers on the team need to read all 30,000 articles. Okay, so after we've made these final decisions, we have our final list of studies, then we can proceed with whatever sort of analysis it was that we wanted to do. Either we're just going to write up a synthesis on, these are the variables and the topics and the findings of all the things in this review, or we're going to pull out some data variables and do a meta-analysis. Whatever it is we have planned as our next steps, we just move forward with that. And then we report our methods, as I said earlier, with that transparent and reproducible structure, so that it can be replicated. Okay, so having finished that sort of quick overview there of the method and its process, what is Rayyan? Rayyan is a web-based app that helps researchers conduct systematic reviews and other types of evidence synthesis. I mean, really, you could leverage it for any context in which you want to be gathering together and working with a large body of literature. Because it's web-based, of course, you can access it from anywhere. No need to download or install things. They have a free tier as well as paid tiers. Um, the paid tier has some extra bells and whistles, but honestly, the free tier is impressively robust. You can really get through most projects. Rayyan does fully support collaboration so that you can have as many researchers as you need sharing access to the project. The Prisma diagram is a common part of how you report the process of your search. Rayyan can create that Prisma diagram for you with a subscription. That's not provided on the free level. But I would absolutely say that, I would absolutely say that if the Prisma diagram is the only thing you want from the subscription, don't bother. I will give you other tools that will help you make that diagram for free. So don't let that be the only factor that pushes you into a Rayyan subscription, but it may have other features you want. All right. So it's just rayyan.ai is their website. You provide an email address and a country to get started and create your account. And I still have some notes here about the old and new interfaces, but I think we've finally passed the hump where everybody should be on the new interface, and it should look blue and white like my screenshot here. We're going to create a new review and give them some basic information: project title, review type, review domain. This doesn't really do anything outside of us. It's just a little bit of descriptive data tracking. After we enter all of the details about our review, we're going to click Create New Review, and then it's going to prompt you to start uploading articles. The most important thing to recognize here is that it's okay if you're not ready to upload your articles yet. I think a lot of us like to kind of create the blank project and then get a little bit of a feel for the interface if it's our first time using it before we really start dumping all of our information in. That's cool. You can just skip this step and we'll be able to get back to this. Adding collaborators. After you either upload your articles or skip, it's going to ask you to add collaborators. Again, you could skip this and do it later. You can always add more people later. To add a collaborator, you enter their email address and you're going to assign them a role. And I've included a chart here that you'll be able to refer back to in the slides later, just to kind of summarize what each role would give someone permissions to do. Based on whether someone is like a co-PI or a graduate research assistant, just depending on what kind of access you want them to have to be able to review things and make review decisions versus like adding files into the review or changing configurations, things like that. All right, so opening and working on a project. At any point when we come back into Rayyan, we'll click on the name of a project to open it. And we're going to have an overview tab that comes up first, sort of like our project dashboard. It's going to show the basic info plus options where we can add collaborators or add our files of references. So let's pause and kind of flip over to the browser here to see what this looks like. All right, so hopefully you should be seeing my browser now. I've got my Rayyan account pulled up. I'm going to click on this Training Sandbox project. All right. So this is my my overview tab, right? My sort of dashboard. It shows me up front the title and review type and all of that I entered it. I can see a summary of my data. So how many references have I imported so far? How many duplicates is it detected so far? Um, I can see collaborators on my project. I don't have any on here yet. Right now, it's just me, but I can always go up and invite members to add collaborators. And then the other piece I will get on my overview tab. This is my fave thing here. There's a section on our screening process. So we can really clearly enter our inclusion and exclusion criteria. So they're right there for all of our reviewers to reference. And then we can see the progress that all of our collaborators have made on getting through their screening. How many articles have they completed? This is really nice if you're the person on the team who's kind of keeping an eye on everybody's progress, keeping everybody on track. You can see how far along they've gotten. It's also going to give us a screening summary here based on conflicts. So places where maybe I said include and you said exclude, and so we have a conflict in our decisions for a particular article. This is going to be looking at, based on all the articles we've screened so far, what percentage of them are indicating a conflict between reviewers. If that number is relatively low, we know we're probably doing a pretty good job understanding and applying our criteria the same way. Obviously, we may have a few here and there where we were a little on the fence and we came up with a different answer, and that's okay. If we see a very high number there, and we're really coming to a lot of conflicting decisions, that might be a red flag that we need to go back and talk about our criteria a little bit more, make sure that we all have the same definitions and understand how to apply them the same way. All right. Flip back to my slides. Okay, so I mentioned deduplication a little bit. Rayyan, what it will do is help you identify the possible duplicates. You still get to make the final judgment about whether or not they qualify as duplicates and whether you want to eliminate, one of them and keep one of them. You can determine what you want to take priority. So it's going to show you kind of two records next to each other. You can be comparing the titles, the authors, the dates. They're going to give you a percent similarity you can look at. Let's see, this is a better screenshot here that's up now. This shows 3 papers that it identifies as being possibly duplicates. And when I go in, it's always going to show you 2 at the same time. So if you have 3 articles, you'll view those as like several sets of 2 so that you're comparing A to B, A to C, B to C, and making sure you're choosing the one you want to keep. So we can make decisions. It'll show us which database each one came from. We can determine if we want to prioritize records from a certain database. Maybe those records have more details in them, or are cleaner metadata, something like that. And so for each pair that we view, we'll just indicate which one to keep. Between A and C, A is better. Between A and B, keep A. All right, we're getting to our screening phase. So we've got at least 2 reviewers, 3 preferred to reduce bias. As I said earlier, we're going to independently read all the search results and define our criteria, and then make decisions about inclusion. Rayyan, like many other systems that do systematic reviews, offer a blinding feature. So while you are actively reviewing, your decisions will not be visible to your collaborators and their decisions will not be visible to you. That way you're not influenced inadvertently, subconsciously by seeing someone else's decision. Go to our screening tab and we can see the blind on icon or button towards the upper right. So we know that we're not seeing our collaborators' answers. The citations will appear in kind of the citations will be listed, in the left pane, and then the details of one article that you click on will be in the right pane. We click on each citation one at a time, read the title and abstract, apply our criteria, and then we have green, yellow, and red buttons to indicate our decisions to include, maybe, or exclude. When we exclude something, we can choose an exclusion reason. And this is very, very helpful. We can say, I'm excluding this because it's the wrong method. I'm excluding this because it's the wrong population. So it gives us a reference later for why something was not included, particularly if we end up needing to have discussions among the group. We can also add other kinds of labels and notes. So if I have a question to myself, I said, this is what I'm getting hung up on in trying to make a decision about this study. I can go ahead and write those notes out while it's fresh in my head and have that right there linked to the article so that it's ready for the team to have a discussion. All right, so here's a screenshot of those exclusion reasons. Wrong drug, wrong outcome, wrong publication. Not every reason may be applicable to your study area, but you have a lot of choices there. So for example, wrong study design, you want only randomized controlled trials, and the article uses a non-random quantitative assignment of treatment. Just an example. All right. Labels. The labels can also be really helpful in terms of, as we're deciding what articles we want to include in our review, we're also trying to think ahead to finding a way to synthesize the information from all these different studies, right? So adding labels can help us think about how different studies relate to each other, where their common themes or shared measures and things are. So although the exclusion reasons are kind of canned, we don't customize those very much. With the labels, we can really customize and define what our labels are, and then apply those to various studies. Okay, here's a close-up on the note field for keeping track of discussion points. Okay, searching. So there is also a function in here to search through the articles to help you with screening. This can be really helpful if maybe there's a certain key phrase and you can kind of know that if this specific phrase appears somewhere in this article, we are almost certainly going to exclude it, or we're almost certainly going to include it. So kind of some key words and phrases that are really gonna be much more likely to go to one decision or another. You can do a search for those. You can also use the filters, and it will propose certain key terms that it sees coming up in a lot of the studies or in none of the studies. And so then you can use those kind of search terms, suggested terms, to filter your list. And then it's much easier. Okay, I've gotten it down to all of these 30 studies that have this thing in common. I can maybe make a batch decision a little bit more quickly. There are some advanced filters that are only available to the paid accounts, that some people may wish for. I've gotten by without them on the free. All right. So here's kind of the bulk action during screening. So like I suggested, maybe there's a certain key phrase that is almost guaranteed to eliminate something that I'm not going to want to look at it. I can do that search. I can check the boxes beside the citations that come up, and then it will give me this option in the middle to take a bulk action. And I can go ahead and click that I want to exclude all of these and put this exclusion reason on all of them. All right, we kind of talked a little bit about monitoring our screening progress. This one's a nice snapshot that's got several different reviewers included in the summary to show how far along we were and our alignment. Okay, resolving screening conflicts. So when everyone is done reading either the abstracts or the full text, we'll go through this twice. When everyone is done and we get together to talk about making a unanimous decision, we'll be working on the screening tab. We will need to turn the blind off so that we can see each other's decisions in order to be able to compare and to discuss. We can filter the citations we're viewing. Instead of viewing all articles, we can click that and view just those with conflict, and that'll show us places where we have different answers. And then we can discuss, the decisions, the reasons, the notes, etc. This is the piece that gets a little weird though. Once the team reaches a consensus, okay, we've all been convinced now that this article should be included. Any reviewer who had marked exclude is going to have to go in and change their own answer. This makes sense when I think about it, but I admit that the first time I did this with a team, we had sort of hoped that the owner of the project could just go through and click a button to say, hey, we've all agreed on this. Just mark this as sort of the master decision. But it really is trying to protect that minimization of bias. So it really is trying to protect us from any one user being able to change or override other reviewers' answers. And so that's why each reviewer really is going to have to go in there and change their decision to match the team consensus. All right, if there's any that are undecided, undecided would basically mean someone had not selected any decision. So it wasn't that they said maybe, it was that they didn't say anything. You want to filter to those and make sure you also resolve any of those so that they end up as either include, maybe, or exclude. You can filter to your maybes. You can talk about those. As I said, at the abstract round, you don't need to completely resolve the maybes. Some of those can wait till the full text round. All right, moving to full text screening. So when I started using Rayyan, it only did one round, and then you had to create an entirely new project to load in your included papers into a second round of screening. I am very, very happy that they have improved that now. So we move from the screening tab, which is like abstracts, to our full text screening tab, where we'll be able to go through the second round. We will need to enable our full text screening. We'll tell it to add data, and we'll mark whatever sets of records we want to move from the abstract screening round. Definitely that's going to be anything we marked included. And then if we want to also include maybes, we'll mark include and maybe and import those citations. The other thing we can do with the full text step is use the upload button to actually attach full text PDFs to the citations. That's kind of an option, to be honest. If you upload the PDFs, you can stay just inside Rayyan and be reading the paper and putting in your decisions. However, the other option is we have URLs in all the citations that'll go back to the database where you found the paper. So you could choose to use those URLs. Just click through, be reading the article in your browser somewhere else, and then scoring in Rayyan. And then you would only need to upload articles that you had to acquire some other way, like through interlibrary loan or through manually scanning from paper. One of the considerations is really just the size, depending on how many citations you have, how many files you're trying to upload. There can be a significant time required to get all of those files uploaded into the system. So it's a choice. We repeat the process with blind on screening, going through and reading the full text and making new decisions. Again, we kind of go through the process to resolve all of our conflicts. We get everything to a clear include or exclude. And now we have our final citations set for analysis. Now I want to go through a few other features that Rayyan has that are optional, but things to be aware of. After you have made at least 50 decisions, with at least 5 include and 5 exclude, you can use their artificial intelligence tool. It will go through and calculate the likelihood of each article meeting your criteria and being included. You could choose to resort the citations by those ratings and then keep making decisions. Maybe that just helps your brain move a little faster if it's already telling you that this one's highly likely to be included and you can kind of reassess it more quickly. At the same time, Could that lead to any bias? Could the tool be swaying me to include something? It's possible. It may help provide some additional information and help you speed up. However, definitely we want to be sure that we as human beings are the ones making the final decision, and not just trusting AI's score blindly. Okay, creating samples. This is another thing that Rayyan will support. So I mentioned earlier, we could have tens of thousands of articles, and maybe we really don't need every single team member to read every article. Creating samples is one way that we can kind of divvy these things up and create groups of things to go to different reviewers. We could also do the same thing after screening. If we're going to be doing different types of data extraction or qualitative analysis, we could pull samples of things like that. We can create a sample from all the references in our set or from filtered data. So you could pre-filter your articles down to a particular subset that share some feature, share some method or variable or whatever it is, and then make a sample out of that. It's kind of a sample of a sample. So there's a lot of flexibility here. The one thing to be aware of is that with a free account, you can only have one sample. If you're going to want to do several different things with samples, that would require a paid subscription. But I've also linked to a resource here that suggests other ways you can divide things up without necessarily paying for their sampling feature. All right. This is a picture of the Prisma flow diagram that I mentioned briefly. This is a very common visual for showing how many sources your search found to begin with, and then kind of how many were culled out at each stage of screening, and then how many are left at the end for analysis. Rayyan will generate this diagram with a paid subscription, but there are at least 2 or 3 other fabulous tools out there. They will either give you the template, and all you have to do is plug in the numbers. You can get the numbers from Rayyan that say, here's how many I uploaded, here's how many I came out with, and just type those numbers in. Or there's a very cool generator app that will have you plug all your numbers in first, and then it will generate the finished visuals. So I don't really think the graphic itself is as hard as they want to make it seem when they charge a subscription for it. A few other features to highlight. There's kind of a chat function, which at first I was like, okay, I guess the people on the team can be chatting while we're reviewing. That left me only, meh as to whether that was useful. But then I realized the chat function also logs key actions. So as we are uploading a new file of references or deleting a file of references or kind of taking other big actions like that, it'll get logged in the chat. That gives us a little bit of a history of what we've done, what's been manipulated, so that if suddenly something looks weird, we could go back and look at that and see if maybe we made a mistake. Maybe we accidentally deleted a file of citations. There is a mobile app to support screening on the go, even screening offline. Personally, I don't really know that I want to be sitting on my phone screening on the weekends, but you absolutely can be. There's a bunch of different options for hotkeys, for keyboard combinations to let you move through and make decisions without touching your mouse. That's very, very popular with some types of users. And there's a lot of options for customizing the interface, which is really great for kind of accessibility and individual comfort. They've got light, dark, and colorblind interface themes. You can adjust the font size and change different kinds of screen alignment and auto scrolling. So that's very, very useful. If you are someone that uses Python, they do have an API and Python software development kit. So almost anything that you could do through the interface, you could code in Python to do programmatically. That will not be useful to everybody, but I'm sure it will be useful to somebody. A few other premium features. These are not comprehensive, but these are a couple of things to think about that may be useful with a subscription. You can create a team. In general, on the free level, a review just belongs to the one person who created it. And then if that person like leaves, deletes their account, whatever, it can cause disruption to other people. So if you create a team, the review belongs to the team as opposed to an individual. You can manage group licensing and better manage access to everyone. They do have an auto resolver for duplicate records. You kind of indicate, uh, you know, always tend to prioritize this database over that database. You can specify that certain pieces of information, like the publication date or the DOI, that certain things need to match exactly, while as others could be close matches. So you can kind of define all these criteria and then tell it to resolve things automatically based on those rules. Um, Caveat emptor, buyer beware as to whether that does a good job. From my testing, it seems to do a pretty decent job, but it also depends on exactly what criteria you end up defining for it, right? I've included a little bit of the notes on the pricing. I'm realizing as I look at my slide that my pricing is about a year out of date, so I apologize for that. But this at least gives a little bit of a sense for an individual student or professional. Um, we're talking approximately $60 or $100 for an annual subscription. Now, Rayyan is, of course, not the only tool here for doing systematic reviews. Covidence is really the big name, I guess, in the industry, kind of the gold standard for doing systematic reviews. There is a free trial available. However, based on my observation, I don't think the free trial is going to be sufficient to finish most reviews. I think people will hit various types of barriers in size or time frame before they can finish a review on a free trial. But it is the big name tool. It's just that it also has the price tag of a big name tool. SysRev has both free and paid tiers. And I realized I have a couple of notes here about Covidence and SysRev supporting data extraction. That actually is in Rayyan now. That is fairly recent. Rayyan will also now do data extraction. So if you want to be pulling out certain variables that other people collected to analyze those over the whole set, Rayyan, Covidence, and SysRev will all support that data extraction. Pico Portal also has free and paid tiers. Free only allows one project, but I was actually quite impressed with how many of their other features they give access to for that one project. HubMeta is totally free, and I know they have actually relaunched their platform here just within the past couple of months. I need to kind of go back in and play and reassess theirs. My thoughts the first time around was that it was very intuitive. I mean, for a tool that had almost no documentation, it was really, even I am not a systematic review like expert at performing them, right? I do not consider myself to be an expert at doing these, particularly not the first time that I looked at HubMeta. But I found it very logical to work with. So it's another one that might be worth looking at. So this just gives you some ideas of other things you could investigate if Rayyan maybe just doesn't quite match with what you're looking for. I've linked to a few additional resources in here that you'll be able to reference back to in the slide. The Rayyan Help Center itself, and then some handbooks and manuals that are going to give more guidance on the methodology side, on the side of actually going through the steps and processes of a systematic review. We've also got some how-to ebooks in the library that break down the systematic review process in a lot of detail. All right, and with that, I'm going to say thank you and open up the floor for questions. You're welcome to use the chat or unmute. Oh, and I see I do have a few questions in chat. Ooh, so let me get back to that. Sorry, y'all, I have a very hard time reading chat while I'm talking. All right, is a systematic review generally considered more reliable than other review types? That's the goal, is that it would be considered more reliable, just based on the size of the team involved, the specificity and reproducibility of the methods involved. As to whether all systematic reviews meet that ideal, I can't say. There are plenty of things out there that call themselves systematic reviews that don't necessarily meet the expectations that they would be asked to meet. But that's the idea, is that they're supposed to be much more free of bias, which then we hope contributes to them being more reliable if we have the most comprehensive base of knowledge possible and the least bias possible. Adding collaborators is free in it is allowed in the free version. Yes, sorry. Yes, you can definitely add collaborators without subscribing. When you upload PDFs of full texts, are you able to mark within the PDF an exclusion reason? Not within the PDF, but um within the screening record. Yeah. Yeah. The 2 rounds of screening for abstracts and full text will pretty much look identical in terms of the interface and choosing your decision and your exclusion reason and adding notes. That part will look entirely identical. It's just a difference of how much of the article you're reading. All right. When there is very limited literature on a specific topic, is it possible to conduct one as an individual, or is a team pretty much required? I would say a team is required to meet the very strict definition of a systematic review, but not everything has to be defined as a systematic review. I would say one person alone could still do a systematized search where they still do their best to employ the same kind of transparent search processes, but they may not meet all of the other like checklist items of a systematic review, if that makes sense. The link for for free tools to create. Yes. Let me end my slideshow here and grab those links for you. Let's see. Okay. There is the Prisma Generator app. Oh, oh, wait, that's not going. There we go. Okay. That's the generator app, and then these are the templates. Did you say how many collaborators you can add? I don't think I've hit a limit yet in Rayyan for adding collaborators. Pretty sure we've had at least 7 or 8 people on a project, and I don't foresee that they would have much of a limit. That is a really good question, though. I haven't run into anything about limits on collaborators. All right. Any other questions? You're welcome to use the chat or unmute, whatever you like. All right. Well, you're welcome. Thank you all so much for coming. You'll get a follow-up email, kind of an automated email that'll come out in about an hour. That'll have a link for the slides and recording. The slides should be up right away. The recording probably take me a few more days, but I'll get that up as soon as I can. And please feel free to contact me absolutely anytime if I can be of assistance. All right. Thank you so much. Have a good rest of your day.